All right, everybody, welcome back to the Best Hour of Their Day podcast. Jason Fern here with my good friend Meagan Burns. We were just chatting before we went record, and I was like, wait, this is good. We'll save it for the podcast. But I'll give Meagan a brief intro, and then we will go from there. So, Meagan, level 2, level 3. You're not level 4, are you? Level 3?
3.
Yeah, level 3 CrossFit trainer. Trained a lot of really good gyms under a lot of really good trainers. So started at CrossFit Invoke back in the day, then was at CrossFit Reebok 1, working with Denise Thomas and Austin and James. Was at CrossFit One Nation, again with Spencer Hindle, Austin, CrossFit Morristown with Bill, who is also going to be on the podcast. That one. Yeah, that's the other one that hasn't been released yet. And then and now is at CrossFit Per Ignem, which is a really cool thing that we're going to talk about. And also is the assistant strength coach at Noble and Greenough Academy. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Very cool. So you've coached at a lot of gyms.
Yeah. Been around, moved around a lot.
When did you actually start coaching?
So I started coaching when I was 20. I'm 28 right now. And that was down at CrossFit Invoke. And really just like Christmas Abbott took me under her wing. And from there, realized she was going through the internship process for seminar staff. So that's kind of how I got into thinking about seminar staff, and then just kind of went on from there. But she definitely was the one that gave me the most, I would say, like mentorship back in the day.
I don't know if you were the youngest ever, but I know for sure you were one of the youngest people ever to make it on seminar staff.
Yeah, I remember it was me and Joey Dill. We were like just freshly 21.
And I think the only person who might have started younger than you might have been Pat Barber.
Oh yeah, how old was he?
He was like he was on just the other day, but I think he was like 18 or 19 maybe. But yeah. I think he was in that the nest at that point with Tony and Greg and all that. So but yeah, I think he might be the only other one that was younger, which I think is significant because working on seminar staff is what I would consider an adult job.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I remember being around, like for my internship, it was Joe and Courtney and Sarah and Kristen and all these people that I was like, I don't know what I'm doing here, but this is awesome. And yeah.
I know for a fact I would have not have had the poise at the age of 20, 21 to do that job, to stand up in front of a group of people, do public speaking, have good, I might have been able to do the presence and attitude piece just because of a lot of sports, but definitely not the public speaking. But I've seen you coach a lot, and that's always something I've been super impressed with is like, I always like watching trainers who, when they coach, you're like, that person fucking knows what they're talking about.
Thank you.
It's just, when you watch somebody coach, you're like, that person's sharp. Like what they're doing is correct. They're confident in it. But was that always the case, or like, obviously you had to be pretty good to get on seminar staff?
Yeah, I don't even know if I was really that good. Maybe I was just like friendly, and then Joe was like, okay, we're just going to give this girl a chance. I don't know. I remember being like, there's no way I'm going to make it. But I do remember there was like a point that people were telling me, if you want to gain more respect, you need to be more serious. So I kind of went from this always joking around, kind of the like little baby, and then I went to full serious mode. Like I remember one point Denise watched my lecture and she was like, I don't think you went from like out of robotic mode with a completely straight face and like you looked angry out there one time. So then I was like, okay, I like shifted too far the other way, because I was like, I just want everybody to respect me. And that now I'm kind of like finding the groove the past couple of years, but it was definitely a weird shift of like the baby and then way too serious. And then, even like, I remember Bobby telling me like, you need to stand up straighter. You need to be like, there's definitely a lot of, growth that's happened over 7-8 years of being on seminar staff that has shaped me into the person I am now with a lot of, like we have so many good mentors on seminar staff, that I don't know where I would be without having those people kind of guide me through that point in my life.
That's always been a fine balance to have, is that being the authority while being engaging. Like that can be a very difficult kind of task, particularly in front of the group. I know I've struggled with it over the years.
Like as a small female, it's hard sometimes to gain that respect. Like being a small female, not like one of the elite athletes, working with like a James, Austin, Spencer, and then like little Meg. So it was definitely like kind of had to find my place and my voice a little bit, like around a lot of those strong personalities and athletes too.
Well, it's definitely not right, but it's a thing, right? So it's like one of these things we just have to acknowledge how the world works. But like Carlene Matthews talked about this. So she's also a small female, but she's got that stigma of a games athlete. So people automatically give her respect, whether that's justified or not is a different topic, which she actually acknowledged that it's not justified just being a good athlete. But for somebody who's a small female athlete who is not, physically imposing, who's not a games athlete, which probably is the majority of female coaches in the CrossFit community. Yeah. How do you go about establishing that type of rapport and that type of authority from a coaching standpoint?
Yeah. Yeah. And I get that question all the time at seminars. People are like, how do you deal with tough clients as a female? And like, what happens if you don't have the skills that you're coaching and all that stuff, which I went through, not having a lot of the skills that I had to coach at first and now having them. But I think it just took the moment that I realized that I needed to stop hiding that I didn't have a certain skill and just embrace like where I was at and my ability level and be open to working on it with people in front of members and things like that gave me the confidence to be in front of a group and not be nervous about that stuff. And then, it kind of worked in my favor because this happened last year. Like last year I didn't have handstand walks. So I started working on it in class or after class with members. And all of a sudden, like all these members started joining in. Now we have like every Wednesday night, we're all doing handstand walks together. I got handstand walks. Jimmy's getting handstand walks. Kelly's getting, everybody's getting them. And so it's like, if you just hide the fact that you're like, well, I'm embarrassed that I don't have this skill and now I'm not going to work on it. And now I feel really insecure, instead of just putting it out there like, hey guys, like I'm working on this stuff too. It makes you more relatable. And that's kind of my strength that I embrace, is like my relatability and the fact that I can scale people maybe a little bit better sometimes than someone that just like popped up on the rings and got their muscle up for the first time.
I think that's the worst coach.
Yeah. Yeah. And then when it comes to like, advanced athletes, and I will learn from other coaches things that I can say, when I'm watching like a Spencer and Austin, like teach somebody how to cycle muscle ups or things like that before I had that skill, then I'm having to learn from them and kind of know where I'm at, where I can give feedback, but that I can still coach the movement and, learn from other coaches that maybe have more experience with advanced athletes or advanced skills.
I think that's one of the biggest hurdles, probably more so at the level 2, new coaches or less experienced coaches who are trying to figure out, or they have that stigma about themselves that they don't have a skill and therefore feel that because they don't have a skill, that they can't teach it.
Yeah. Yeah. And so it's just like embracing that and working your ass off to get it and doing it in front of other people, and not being like, oh, I'm going to do this privately by myself and be really embarrassed, and like putting it out there to others, getting help from others, embracing scaling options, like can really be something that helps bring you down to the members level almost, but also, show them that like you're trying to work your ass off to get the skill, and you're not just like, oh, I don't have handstand walks and I don't care to work on them, right? You're like, I don't have them, I care to work on them, and I want you guys to work on them with me, so we're all going to do it together.
Yeah, I think that's important too from a leadership standpoint of, you have to be willing to do yourself what you're going to ask of your athletes. So if you're like not going to work on that stuff, then you can't tell people hey, you can't do handstand push-ups because you don't fucking know how to walk on your hands. So, you know.
And I love it. I mean, we do it, like, I've gotten some of the kids at the high school to like practice with me and stuff. And it's cool that their coach can work on stuff with them instead of like the typical high school setting where it's like, well, the football coach is really never going to like play football with it. I mean, they might, but like they're off to the side and the players are playing. Whereas like for me, I'm working with some of these kids doing handstand walks, failing. They're doing it with me. They're failing. We're all getting better together. So it kind of promotes this sense of like, nobody's better than anybody. We're all doing it, which is exactly CrossFit. We're all doing the same thing together. And we're, you know, working on our own, like on our own level.
What sports do you coach at the high school?
So it's a strength and conditioning program. So what they have is an after school program where they split a group of kids that sign up for this afternoon program into 3 different groups or 2 different groups. So like in the fall and winter, we have big groups. Maybe it'll be groups of like 20 or 30. We take them through always a lift and accessory work. And then 1 day a week, we have a team competition, which is usually CrossFit. So that's where I get to program the strength coach programs, all that. It's kind of more like linear strength work that they go through. And then in addition to that program, we'll have teams come in. So it's any team that wants to go through strength and conditioning on the off season or even in the in season. But I don't teach like a specific sport. It's just a strength and conditioning. So my title is assistant strength and conditioning coach.
That brings up 2 questions. The first, so that's actually really cool. So this is not the program that you are coaching is not sports specific, obviously, or just for sports. It's for any kid that just wants to get in the weight room.
Yep. Yeah. So I think they originally brought me in because they were having more girls sign up for the program. The strength coach is kind of like typical, you know, what you would think a strength coach is, like big guy. He can probably, you know, bench press like 300 pounds plus, whatever. And then the girls were a little timid and they like didn't really have anybody to relate to. And then my experience with like Olympic lifting and things that they don't really do. So we kind of are a good pair together because he has his strengths, I have my strengths, and then we put them together.
That was actually my follow-on question was, how does that relationship work? Because typically in my experience, traditional strength and conditioning coaches are extremely resistant to any mention of CrossFit.
Yeah. Kevin, the strength and conditioning coach, is really awesome and open-minded to pretty much anything. I mean, we follow his program. Like he has a set, you know, like what they're going to do for their lifts and their accessory work, which is a lot of stuff that I've learned that is different than what we do in the CrossFit world, like single leg stuff, all that stuff for injury prevention, which is good for me to know because it may not be the best for in-season football players to do CrossFit, right? Or to, you know, like they need to get their injury prevention stuff and all that in their programming. But he's super open. And also the athletic director is, he's really into CrossFit. I met him through One Nation and he is Heather Bergeron's ex-husband. So he's kind of like been in the world of CrossFit and Kevin knows Ben and all that stuff. So I think it's kind of a unique situation with him. But the kids are definitely a little resistant, meaning like they don't understand the squat below parallel and lock out your arms on pull-ups and things like that. So it's a little weird trying to get them to understand that, especially again from a small female, you know, that's taken like 2 years for them to now start to listen, like, oh, she knows what she's talking about, kind of thing.
Do you ever just have to step up and grab a barbell and snatch it overhead and just embarrass teenage boys?
Yeah. So I mean, there will be sometimes that I'll work out before the strength class and they'll see me and then start kind of asking questions like, all right, what do you do? Or like, you have to almost like gain your respect there because they have some amazing athletes. Like a lot of them are already signed at top schools and they're sophomores. But they're just not used to that world and they think it's really unsafe because CrossFit gets this, you know, like, oh, it's super unsafe. I will say one thing. The amount of things I've seen in a high school weight room, I'm like, there's no way people can say CrossFit's unsafe because like the things that kids decide to do like on their own, I'm like, no.
That is a whole podcast by itself.
Yeah.
I mean, again, I think CrossFit gets a lot of bashing probably just because we're a very large, easy target.
Yeah.
But I was very fortunate to always have really, really knowledgeable strength and conditioning coaches. Like the guy who programmed for us in high school was a world-class power lifter, is the first guy to ever break 2,500 pounds, like multiple stages. So like squatting and deadlifting and all that stuff I learned from a very young age. Then when I was in college, one of our strength and conditioning coaches was Kurt Woolfolk, who is his daughter was an Olympian weightlifter and is married to Coach Bergner. I think she's married to Casey Bergner.
Okay.
So, and then I stumbled into CrossFit. So I've always had, and then in high school too, I spent some time with Gail Hatch, who's a world-renowned weightlifting coach too. So like, I was always just very fortunate to get that. But the point of that weird tangent was I've seen some crazy shit in high school weight rooms. Like stuff that people think CrossFit's dumb. Like I've seen some people posting videos of what they're doing in the weight room, and it makes me want to throw up in my mouth.
Yeah. So like I never knew this could happen, maybe because I never have 245s on each side of my bar when I'm squatting. But you know that when you have 245s on one side, 245s on the other side, and you take the 245s off one side, you know that the bar falls over on the other side.
The flying spear of death. Yeah.
Yeah, that happens on a regular basis. And I'm like, I've never seen that happen before until I was in that setting. I don't know. It's weird.
Well, I don't know that only happens in the high school weight room. So
yeah.
So Phil, Sabatini, who runs our weightlifting program at our gym, he's a phenomenal weightlifter, former national champion, 96 kilo. But he and I regularly joke that probably once every 10 days, somebody dumps a weight off of the squat rack because they unloaded them properly. And these are people who fucking know what they're doing. Yeah. And I'm just like, what were you thinking just now? Like,
yeah, it's crazy.
So going back to the strength and conditioning stuff, I'm curious. So I went the other direction. So I went from sports specific training to CrossFit. You're kind of going from CrossFit to sports specific training. For people who are, because I know a lot of people are trying to get into that now. So like trying to get into training sports specific athletes. But I think there's a massive mistake that people are making is trying to lay a very GPP program onto sports specific athletes. What are some of the things that you kind of previously thought about training that you, I don't want to say backtrack, but like you kind of understand a little bit better now that may not be the best approach for a sports specific athlete?
Yeah. I think, even though my background is CrossFit, I tried to kind of go in and I didn't want to step on anybody's toes and just follow along with what, Kevin was programming. And then tried to implement some stuff with some athletes and just talking with him about how in season is different than off season. And the fact that, seeing so many of these kids get injured in their sport, gives me a little worry if I were to have them do some like super technical lifts and that injury risk there for them if they're not under my eye or, even if something just kind of off happens that could take them out for the season, that could then, be damaging to their career, which like I said, a lot of them are like legitimate athletes that are going to go on to top schools. So I had to pull back and be a little bit cautious just because I was nervous about the injury risk for them, mostly doing more so Olympic lifts like at speed or with high intensity. But, a lot of the stuff that we do for our team competitions, it's high intensity, but a little bit more of body weight movements. So I 100% think everybody should be doing high intensity work. I think it would make the athletes a lot better. A lot of them are still like, they're not into it. They don't like to work really hard. They like to lift and not breathe hard. But I think it would make a lot of them better. And then the full range of motion concept, that's like the one thing I'm just trying to hammer home to them is like, let's take the weight down. Let's get full range of motion. This is why, and having to explain it to them. And I was talking to Matt DeBrook and he was saying that, these kids that if they don't train full range of motion, what happens when they fall or get pushed and they land in this weird position that they've never experienced because they don't go full range of motion in their squat. And that's the biggest thing that I'm like, I feel like they don't understand that. But if they did, they would be like, oh, if I actually train full range of motion in my squat, Then I land in this weird position. Well, I've already been there before and I already have strength there. I'm not going to blow my knee out because Jay, the amount of injuries like with these high school kids is like insane. And I'm sure this, obviously it's not the only school that like is like that, but you know, there's injuries like left and right just from sport.
It's interesting you bring that up because I think, oddly enough, I think this is where like a really seasoned CrossFit coach probably has a massive advantage over most people, just because obviously CrossFit is a lot of it is very repetitive movement. So if you think about just the volume of movement that you're going to stack up on your eyeballs that you're going to get to see if you're coaching, I don't know, call it 20 classes a week or 40 classes a month or something like that, puts you at a major advantage to see movement. And then when you walk into a weight room and you understand that pelvic shift in a squat, valgus knees and stuff like that are prime predictors for ACL injury, and it doesn't take you any time to see those things, you're like, we have to fix that squat. We have to fix that squat, and injury preventions injuries rates will just plummet.
Yeah. Yeah. And I really think that like, you know, in the strength and I'm sure like when you were in high school, like they don't really have, like we do coach when we're in the strength and conditioning like class, but outside of that, kids just come in by themselves and they're lifting, they're not getting this like specific coaching. And that's what I feel like the strength and conditioning world sometimes can take from CrossFit is that like nothing is being done if you're at a good gym without being coached. And you know, you're not going to lift that weight because this is what you look like right now. This is what we need you to look like right now. This is how you're going to hurt yourself if you lift this weight, you know, so on and so forth. But that's the one thing that I'm like trying to get a little bit more coaching on a regular basis for the kids that just come in there by themselves.
Yeah, I think that the coaching, because like even though I had good coaches, a lot of it was just like do this, and a lot of people are just kind of hanging their hat on the fact that like kids are just resilient. Like it's really hard to break youth athletes. Right. However, and generally it doesn't happen in the weight room. It happens on the playing field because of poor mechanics. But the way I try to explain it to kids and parents, more importantly, is what we're actually trying to teach is like physical competence, right? And the difference between you know, unknown and known environments is like the weight room is known. Like I know you're going to do this and I know you're going to move in this movement pattern. Like everything there is understood and I can demonstrate. When we leave the weight room, everything at that point, we step onto the court or the playing field is an unknown environment. You have to deal with different planes of motion, move in directions without prompt. You have to deal with another athlete who's going to mess up or impede your movement patterns. And if athletes can't move well in a controlled, known environment, there should be zero expectation that they can do that in an uncontrolled environment.
Exactly. Yeah, totally. That's a great way to put it.
How long have you been there?
2 years.
And then have you seen?
I'll be working there again in the fall.
Okay. And then have you seen a little bit more buy-in, a little bit with kind of, I don't want to say the CrossFit side, but with like just the addition of that style of training since you've been there?
Yeah. I mean, I think people now are starting to or the kids now are starting to buy in a little bit more to, you know, why we do a full range of motion squat, why are we locking out our pull-ups, things like that. But especially the high school boys that are maybe the more like elite athletes would never come up to me and be like, hey, can you help me with this or that? And so now I think just from me working out there and me coaching and, you know, seeing results with the program, that now kids will come up and be like, hey, Coach Burns, they have to call me Coach Burns, which is so weird. Hey, Coach Burns, can you help me with this? Or what do you think about this? Can you give me some accessory work? And I'm used to them always going to Kevin. And I think it was just like, they know Kevin. He's like the guy that's, you know, obviously like looks like he can lift a lot of weight. He can lift a lot of weight. So why would they come to me? So it's been cool this year, especially seeing them open up just a little bit more and be receptive. They all like, I don't think I've had anybody really buy into CrossFit. I have a couple kids that like I'll give workouts to. But anytime we do team competitions and we have to run like 2 laps around the track, they're like, no, you know, I'm like, hey, strength and conditioning program. Like, what do you think you sign up for? And they're like, we don't like to, you know, get out of breath and this and that. I'm like,
yeah, me neither.
Another thing like I would implement more is like, we need to like have them condition more. And Alex, who is the one that I said has experience with CrossFit, he would send his basketball girls to us and like want them to be conditioned, because he's like, last year we were really deconditioned and like we could play well, but we couldn't last for a long time. So all that stuff, you know, getting people to see like there's carryover, and it's not just like CrossFit is in its own bubble. Like, how does CrossFit style of training carry over into sport? Can be really helpful. People just understand and keep their, you know, minds open to it.
I'm going to call you Coach Burns from now on.
It's so weird. They're like, what's your name? I'm like, Meagan. Coach Burns. The head of the school, like, you're not supposed to say the
first names.
First name.
I just saw a weird video of like some kid walking through the halls just calling all the teachers by their first names, and they're all freaking out.
Yeah.
So on a different well, not a different topic, but just different question. What have you taken from that traditional strength and conditioning side, or have you taken anything from there into the CrossFit gym?
Yeah, I would say definitely it's given me a lot. I would say it's given me a lot of knowledge on the injury prevention and accessory work that they do there. All the lifts are the same. Like, we do hang cleans and at the school, and back squat and deadlift, but single leg step up, banded work, like all that stuff to specifically prevent ACL and, you know, get you balanced from one side to the other. A lot of hamstring work, things like that sometimes we miss in the CrossFit gym. I've started to implement that a little bit more, just, you know, here and there, like after classes, because I've learned that from the school. That's
what I thought you were going to say. And that's something we started implementing like at CrossFit Rife like a year ago, maybe.
Yeah.
Is, well, it does two things. A, it kind of subtly and subconsciously like gives people some of those pieces that they're missing in their movement, either whether it's unilateral movement that they suck at and they have imbalances, or they have an injury or something like that they've been compensating for that they're not aware of. But it also has helped us really scratch the itch of people wanting to do more.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it helps us kind of eliminate that, like, I want to do multiple workouts. And it's like, well, are you doing all the accessory work? Because I mean, I would tell you, like, virtually nobody does all of the accessory work.
Right. Yeah. And that stuff is hard if you do it right. So it's like you're getting the injury prevention and it's tough.
Well, I think it's also a different type of training that most people aren't used to, which it's generally you're dealing with like localized muscle fatigue, which is not generally what we deal with in CrossFit. Like, it's like full metabolic conditioning where like the system just wants to shut down, versus when you're doing accessory work, it's like my triceps can't press anymore, or my hamstrings are about to blow up from these banded hamstring curls. So it's different. And I think that allows them to really kind of take a step back and say, okay, this is a lot of work actually.
Yeah.
So I want to back up and I want to talk a little bit about kind of how you got there and kind of that journey, because I don't think people kind of picked up on this when I gave the intro, but the gyms that you've been at are all good gyms under good coaches. But I'm curious kind of like, what, if you look back on it now, like, what does that evolution kind of look like? Was there something you picked up at each location, or are there certain skills that when you went from gym to gym that you realized you were deficient at, or kind of how does that look when you look back at it now?
Yeah. I mean, each one was definitely hard to leave, because I was with such good people and such great mentors, and they're all seminar staff at each gym that I worked at, which was awesome. So I never had to deal with, when people ask a question at the level one, well, what if the owner of the gym wants to do 5 workouts and that's not the way or whatever, how do you deal with that gym owner? It was always like, we were always on the same page, which was really cool. When I was at Invoke, that was when I was really just kind of like learning how to coach and being mentored by Christmas. And then going up to Reebok CrossFit 1, I was still really young and like still kind of learning. And I ended up leaving Reebok CrossFit 1 probably before I should have, just from making decisions in my life. It ended up leading me back to CrossFit One Nation, but I probably would have never left there in the first place. Looking back on it, but I did really enjoy my time at Morristown. I made a lot of good friends there. I love Cariana and Bill. They're amazing gym owners. And then going back to One Nation, that was probably where I really like not had uncomfortable moments, but was surrounded by all these amazing athletes, and I wasn't like in that group. So figuring out how to hold my own, how to, scale my own workouts, be okay with skills that I didn't have, work on those skills, be around a lot of amazing coaches that were giving me feedback a lot of times, and learning from them, but also not being so nervous to coach in front of them. So that was probably, when I got to One Nation, like the most challenging. I mean, I was with Greg, who's a seminar staff member, and he would just like sit on the side of my classes and like write down all this feedback. And, so that's where I probably developed most, I would say, as a coach, with my confidence maybe.
How did you deal with feedback at the beginning?
I've always been open to feedback. I mean, that's never really been hard for me. I was more like the nervousness of having an Austin or a James or a Greg or somebody just like watching my class. And that took a while to really like just be myself in front of other people watching my class. And I think that's the biggest thing now that I'm in a role where I'm giving feedback to other people. I can tell that they get that same nervousness when I'm watching them. So I almost like step away, like out of sight, instead of just sit there and watch. Like, Greg was like an asshole and like sat there just like staring at me with his whiteboard. And I'm like, Greg, really? So like trying to remember how I felt when I was getting that feedback. And I think going through that process helps me to give feedback. But that was the hardest, not getting the feedback, just like getting watched and not getting nervous and like blowing my whole class.
What do you think allowed you? So that's kind of an abstract concept, but it's very valuable, but it can be hard to wrap your brain around as a new coach, which is like, just be yourself. And you're like, yeah, but I'm about to piss my pants because you're over there jotting notes, and this class is huge and it's the snatch and the muscle up. So like, how do you go about getting to the point where you're like, I'm comfortable being myself at this point?
Yeah. I think, one thing that I definitely have learned from working with Austin is, like, you really need to practice what you preach. And I think once I, started like dialing in my nutrition and working on the skills I need to work at, and actually taking class and scaling myself appropriately and all that kind of stuff, and not just like working out by myself and doing my own thing, or like, being kind of bought in with the nutrition, but kind of not. Like, that's when I felt like I not had a leg up on other members, but like they respected me because I was, eating the way that I was telling them to eat, and like working on myself and my workouts the way I was telling them to do. So it kind of came a little bit more naturally once I started to do that.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things, and you can speak to this too, but like one of the things that I really try to harp on in the level 2 particularly is people just are not putting in the work. Yeah. Like they're not putting in the work to do the stuff that's not sexy. Like learn the points performance, learn the faults, practice giving cues, do dry runs on your lesson plan. And that's what I try to really explain to people, is like, that is how you become comfortable in your own skin from a coaching standpoint, is when you can start to develop that kind of unconscious competence where I'm not thinking about what I'm doing. This is just how I do things.
Right. And like, getting uncomfortable, like it is uncomfortable to go to a team training at One Nation with all these games athletes and have to like drastically scale down what you're doing in front of everybody, and it's uncomfortable to put yourself in a scenario where you're getting this tough feedback. Like I remember, I would walk around with the PVC pipe, and Christmas would like interrupt my whole class and take the PVC pipe. And like, it was embarrassing, but I was okay with being uncomfortable and just like learning from that situation. I think that at the level 2, and like when I'm giving feedback here, it's the ones that aren't open to the feedback or being uncomfortable that really struggle with it. And if they could just like, you know what, this is going to kind of suck and be a little embarrassing, and like not stuff that I would generally want to do, that's going to make me better. When you can start being okay with that, then it really becomes a lot easier.
Yeah, it's just such a hard thing to break through on because it's painful in the process.
Yeah.
But, Chuck brought this up on that previous episode, which was, that feedback piece and that uncomfortable piece, like, is that critical piece that allows you to grow. Like, there's no other way other than constantly being in that kind of cycle of like, this is your feedback. This is where we can get better. These are things you do well, but this is things that you do like, okay. And then at some point, like, you just suck less. And you probably spend a lot of time in the suck less category before you're pretty good. And the things that you're talking about are largely abstract in nature. They're just like, hey, don't stand that way. Like, fucking smile occasionally, like stuff like that.
Yeah. And so now it's interesting now that I'm in a role where I'm giving feedback and realizing like how challenging of a job that is to give feedback, because not everyone responds to feedback in the same way. And I respond to feedback like, I want you to just tell me, hey, like, this podcast sucked. Like, next time you do it this way. And then I'd be like, got it. Like, we'll do another podcast, or versus like, okay, it was all right, like kind of beating around the bush. And I'm realizing that not everybody can take it like that. And I can't be so like, hey, that wasn't good. Like, do it better this time, do it this way or whatever, with everybody, because that just does not work with everybody.
I think that's actually like perfect segue into the next piece, which is I kind of wanted you to talk about your time and things you guys are doing at Per Ignem CrossFit now.
Yeah. Yeah.
So for those people that don't know what Per Ignem is and what that program is all about, kind of give them the rundown on that.
So Per Ignem CrossFit supports a nonprofit, which is the Phoenix, which supports folks in recovery. So it's a free, active, sober community. And so any membership for Per Ignem that's paid for, just like any CrossFit gym, goes directly to support the Phoenix, which is a nonprofit. So anytime someone signs up, it paves the way for 4 people to come on the Phoenix side for free. So it's a really cool concept because the for-profit side is completely supporting the nonprofit side. And then there are multiple locations. So there's one here in Boston, there's one in Colorado, there's one in California. The Phoenix has been around and is all over the US, but the CrossFit gyms that are attached are in those 3 locations.
And those are all Per Ignem locations, correct?
Yep.
So Mike Brady runs the one in Colorado, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Who runs the one in California?
Caitlin Honeycutt is the head coach over there.
Okay, cool. So what is that? I would imagine there's some people that would be freaked out just by the thought of trying to deal with addicts of any substance. But what are those classes like?
Yeah. So we have one consistent class a day that's free for people to come in that are either in recovery or supporters of recovery. And we have a team member agreement that they have to abide by, like 48 hours to sobriety. You're not going to see anybody like take their shirts off. We're going to have clean language on the music and just be respectful and all that kind of stuff. And they always, how the Phoenix works is they always have a peer in recovery coach those classes. So I'm never the one to coach unless they need some coverage, and there always needs to be someone else, like a staff member, that's there to assist me if I'm coaching the class. The Per Ignem classes are only for the paid for clientele, and they do not have to abide by the team member agreement. So that's like the 5:30, 6:30 a.m. noon class, 5 and 6 p.m. But it definitely is, and we were just talking about it this morning. It is, a little bit of a different culture than you'll see maybe at a regular CrossFit gym, because we're all under one roof. So the Denver location has a Per Ignem in one building and the Phoenix in the other building, so they don't really mesh. A lot of the time we're all under one roof, so there is some overlap. So when we had our Memorial Day workout, we're not having like beers after, and you won't see people with their shirts off and things like that. So we try to be pretty upfront with people coming in on like what we're about and what we support. And we have a pretty small community now because we just opened in the end of September. But everybody's been super supportive and respectful. And so definitely a little bit different than what I was used to at One Nation, where like people are taking their shirts off in the warm up, and like, you know, there's always beers after Friday night classes and things like that at all the other CrossFit gyms I've worked at. So it's just a little bit different.
Have you ever had to turn somebody away from class because they violated some of the agreements?
Yeah, usually, you know, there are some awesome staff members that are here that are, you know, experienced with dealing with people that may not be completely sober and abiding by the team member agreement. So that is like not my experience, that I've had to watch them deal with some of those scenarios, especially like where we are in town. We're kind of in a rough area in Boston, where people are like, you know, doing drugs right around the corner. But they've handled it really well. That I'm learning a lot from how they handle these tough situations, how they talk to people, what people look like when they're not 48 hours sober. And that's not something I've dealt with a lot because I don't have anybody in my family that has had experience with that. I'm not in recovery. So it's it's just a different, after doing CrossFit and coaching for so many years, it brings a new perspective, and it's cool for me because it's something new that I'm learning and having to like get feedback on like how I had to deal with that person and, you know, tell them they couldn't be in class or whatever.
Has that helped you give feedback like in a normal scenario?
Yeah. I mean, we have, now that I'm giving feedback to, there's like 6 different people that I'm giving feedback to on a regular basis. And some are in recovery, some are not. And it just kind of depends on like where they're at with their coaching career, where they're at with their personal life and their recovery, and like how they're used to taking feedback. And if, you know, they are not used to that or get defensive or are completely open to it or a little bit more sensitive or not. There's definitely a lot of different personalities, which has been challenging for me and also good because this is, again, it's like new to me to be able to give feedback because I've never been in a head coach role before. But just having to realize like pretty quickly on, okay, this is not, my feedback style is not going to work for some people that I'm giving feedback to.
Chuck brought up something really cool that I had started doing just coincidentally myself, which is just lead with a question rather than lead with your feedback, which is just like, how do you think it went?
Yeah. And actually the guy, one of the guys that, or the Per Ignem like manager, he oversees everything. We were on a leadership call and he was like, I usually lead with that. Like, how do you think it went? Now I do that. And I'm like, that's the best piece of advice I've gotten, is just like ask first. And then it usually leads to, versus I was giving it more of like just what I thought right away.
Because sometimes people will tell you all those things. They're like, I had a shitty night last night. And you're like, okay, well, cool. Then I'm going to basically chop the bottom half of this feedback because it's not relevant at this point.
Totally.
Yeah, but that's been one of the biggest things that I've learned is like just lead with a question first. Most of the time they're right on the feedback anyway. They already know what they did wrong. Like you can just now give them the corrective actions in order to do that. But they acknowledge it instead of you saying you fucked it up.
Yeah.
What are some of the biggest things? So like a couple things, like what are some of the biggest things that you've learned with dealing with people in recovery? And then kind of some do's and don'ts. And then if people want to get involved with that, because I don't know a whole lot of people who are not affected by, by that, either whether it's, 1 or 2 degrees of separation, but like, I think virtually everybody knows somebody who's in recovery. So first thing is, what are some things that you've learned in dealing with folks that are in recovery? And then if people want to get involved, how do they go about doing that?
Yeah. Well, the staff and the coaches here are awesome, and they're really open about their stories and where they're at in their journey with recovery. And when we were talking about it this morning and how do we intertwine the two groups? Like, we don't want to tell a paid member that's not in recovery that like, hey, you can't talk about what you did this weekend and like go out and drink. And then we also want to be respectful of people that are new to their recovery, and how do we like mix the two? And Mike, one of the coaches here was like, I don't like to be put in this like separate category. And he's like, I don't like that we're like, it's like the normal people and the addicts. So really trying to find a way to like mesh the two. And that's what I think is probably a strength of mine, is not really thinking about like where this person came from or what's their background or whatever, and just treating everybody the same. Like everybody that comes to my CrossFit class is going to get coached the same. We're not going to put like people that are maybe a little bit more sensitive to I know sometimes people ask us at the level too, well, what if I hurt their feelings? Like you're obviously not trying to coach and like yell at everybody, but everybody should be getting coached and corrected regardless of who they are, to then just like reduce that stigma around like, hey, there's two separate groups, and people in recovery still are, out in the world and living around people that are drinking or whatever it is. And just being respecting them, but also like not treating them any different is the biggest thing that like Mike was saying today. He was like, I don't want to be treated any different.
Yeah, I think that's hard to, it makes sense when you say it, but like sometimes we just kind of unconsciously like act differently towards people. Like I was just thinking before, is it even okay to call people addicts? Like, and I should probably know this, like my mom is a recovering alcoholic and alcoholism runs in my family, but I'm like, do you say they're in recovery? Are they an addict? Like, does that offend people? Like, what's the PC way to deal with that?
We do a really cool, so before any of the Phoenix classes, they do a circle up, which is like you say your name and you say whether you're in, the terminology is whether you're in recovery or you're a supporter of recovery. And so each person can go around and say what they want to say. And that was another thing that I, kind of had a question of like, what if people don't want to say, or do they like to say, or, and sometimes people come in there, like, I'm an addict. Like it usually we use the term recovery, but we're not going to like shut somebody down for what they want to say. But, Mike was saying again to this guy, he was like, it was really empowering to me to be able to stand in front of a group and be like, I'm in recovery and fit in with a community of people and work out in the same space as maybe a supporter or someone that's not in recovery, and be proud of that versus like, outside the gym walls, sometimes it's like this weird thing where, you have to kind of keep it private or people don't understand, or, he was like, I feel really comfortable in this gym to be able to say that. And I think that's the cool thing about CrossFit is like, it just promotes that nobody's better than somebody else. We're all working out, doing the same thing. And so that's typically what we'll say when we go around the circle.
That's cool. I'm like looking at your resume right here, which it's probably safe to say that very few people in the CrossFit world will have a resume that looks like that, right? Like meaning it coached at these gyms, coached under these people, like the coaches that you've coached under, like big names, and there's no shortage of them. For people that don't have access to that, what would be your advice in order to start developing yourself as a coach? Meaning like, I don't have access to either a seminar staff member or somebody who's really good, or B, I can't just pick up and move to Boston.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I would say the first step, the thing that helped me the most, is the whole practice what you preach. Like that should be like the platform that anybody does anything from, because then you're practicing what you preach, but you're also getting to learn from, your members, as well as like, you're not just only learning from other coaches, you're learning from members because you're in class with them, or you're working on your weaknesses with them and learning from maybe somebody that has something that you don't. So doing that at the base, and then gosh, like the more you can just watch other people. I just remember I when I was at Invoke, like I would just try to watch every coach's class and get as much experience watching, because you learn what you like and what you don't like. And even when I watch here, like new coaches, I'm picking up new cues all the time. And that's not from anybody that's a seminar staff member. That's from someone that just started coaching that thinks differently than I do, that's explaining something different. That I'm like, oh, I'm totally going to steal that. And I don't see people a lot of times watching other classes. And I remember when I was at Invoke, Christmas had to be like, hey, like you need to go home. Like you've been here too long, like go. And because I just wanted to watch people's classes. So if you don't have experience with that, you can still learn from other coaches. And if anything, you're like, this is definitely what I don't want to do, by just watching the way somebody else coaches.
It's funny you bring that up because people have asked me in the past, they're like, usually if you look at somebody's career, there's like a pretty specific period of time where they made like big jumps in their development. And I remember specifically when mine was, and it was when I started giving people feedback, because I would sit down and I was watching 2 to 3 classes a day of other people coaching. And from a practical standpoint, if you're not the person that's going to be giving feedback, you can still sit down and jot 2 to 3 pages of notes of the class. The things that you're going to learn in 1 week, if you do 3 classes a day of that, is going to be so much information that you probably couldn't take action on all of those things in a 6-month period.
Yeah. And I think like from, being at One Nation and then being here, and what we require here is like doing the whole lesson plan and preparing for your class. I definitely did not do that until I came to One Nation. And I honestly do not know how I ever coached a successful class without doing that. Like I have no idea. Did I just like look at the board and I was like, well, today we're going to run 400 meters and as our warm up and then like just get right into it. Like, I don't know how I ever ran on time, like anything like that. So, making a lesson plan and really like preparing for your class, just like you would go into work and meet with your boss. Like you wouldn't be unprepared for this like really important meeting. It's the same thing with this. And so even if you're not watching somebody else that's super successful with their coaching, it's like preparing for your class like you would prepare for out in like, the business world is something that I think people forget to do because it's so easy to just look at the board and they're like, no, I'm just going to do this today and wing it.
Yeah. I mean, I'll just tell you my experience. Like I did not coach any good classes for years because I wasn't prepared. It wasn't like, how did I ever do that? And it's like the class went down, but it was just a goat rope, but nobody died and everybody did some fitness, but like at no point did it resemble an effective, kind of impression of what coaching should look like.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
Cool. If people want to find any information about the Phoenix project or Per Ignem, like where's the best place for them to search for that stuff?
So the best place is probably on the website, thephoenix.org, or they can just go to Per Ignem, CrossFit.com, and then they'll see information from both. There's an explanation on the Per Ignem CrossFit of what we support and what our mission is, and then there's more details with the Phoenix side that the Phoenix is also at locations. Like we have a guy named Ben who's on the Cape, and he has one Phoenix class a week that he holds at his gym. So he's not a Per Ignem location or a Phoenix location, but he's still holding that class. He's in recovery himself, for people to just come in for free. So, you could have that at your gym, right? And like have one class on a Saturday at 10 that's a Phoenix class where people can come in that are in recovery or supporters of recovery. So that's a pretty cool thing that they're doing too.
Yeah, that was kind of my question. Is it like an affiliation process or you just kind of try to put it together? Because Carlene Matthews, she was saying she does something very similar because she's in recovery as well. But to my knowledge, she's not involved in that project.
Yeah, so that's a different side of it. That's the Phoenix Rising side. And it's not through an affiliation, but that I don't know exactly how it works, but they would just open that class up. But I do believe it needs to be someone that's in recovery running that class or someone that's trained on that, because they do like the peer-to-peer model there. So Ben can do it at his gym because he's in recovery, and then he can also lead that class.
Got it. Okay, cool. Last thing. What podcast or documentary series are you watching currently? Do you watch TV?
Yeah. So I just got done watching The Final Table on Netflix. Have you seen that?
It's a cooking show, right?
It's really good. And then I just got into that Sherlock Holmes show on Netflix. It's called Sherlock.
Oh, I know what you're talking about, but I haven't watched it. I don't watch a ton of TV, but I know what you're talking about.
That's really good. And then the podcast I've been liking. Do you know who Dr. Anthony Gustin is? He's got a keto podcast.
Oh, okay.
Let me see what the name of it is. And I'm not a big, like, this is not because I'm keto or anything, but he's a really knowledgeable guy, and he's got some great, the Keto Answers podcast with Dr. Anthony Gustin. And, you know, he's a big keto guy, but he's got a lot of other, like, great nutrition information, and he's into CrossFit. He was on the Bruce Strength podcast and stuff. So he's got a lot of good information, and he kind of breaks it down into a non-sciencey way of talking.
I like it.
Yeah.
Cool. Last thing, anything, Ackerman likes this question and I like it too. Is there something, a belief or idea that you've had in the past that you no longer believe?
I think probably, I guess this is just like fitness related, but that although I work for CrossFit and I'm all about CrossFit, and I live the CrossFit lifestyle, that's not the only way. And so my idea has shifted, because it was even when I started working out at high school, I'm like, it's only CrossFit. Like, we can only do it this way. It's not that. And while that is my belief, I'm a lot more open-minded to other areas of fitness, because at this point, I really just care that people work out and that they eat healthy. So it's less about like, this is the only way, even though I think CrossFit is the best way, but more that they just work out and eat right.
I like that. And I've kind of come to that same realization over the last couple of years, that like, if you're going to ask me like, what is the best possible program to get people to peak health, CrossFit, bar none. However, there is a tens of millions, if not billions of people that are never going to do CrossFit. Yeah. So maybe I just have them do something else.
Yeah. And we had a boot camp class at One Nation that the guys would come in, they like could care less about fitness. They're, you know, a lot of them are overweight, and like in the middle of the workout, they'd start doing push-ups, and there are no push-ups written in the workout. And it's like, what are you doing, man? And they're like, just trying to get my arm pump. And you're like, you know what? Go ahead. Like, rather you be here than not be here.
That's a good idea. I'm going to join you.
But back in the day, I would be like, no, like you're doing it, you know, and it's not that we let everybody do whatever they want, but it's like those guys, they just want to come in and like, they want to get their pump on, like they're working out rather than be there than not be there.
I think Pat Sherwood said this a while back when I was talking to him. He's like, listen, he goes, if people want to be gym rats,
yeah,
just let them be gym rats, dude. Like, it's clearly making them happy. So don't try to impose your will on them. Like, just trying to like gracefully guide them to good decisions.
Yeah. That's a good question.
Yeah. Cool. All right. Well,
hey, I'm going to ask you a question.
Okay. All right.
Okay. So we always do icebreakers in that 11 o'clock class. And so we've used like every possible icebreaker like on the planet. Okay. Do you have like one icebreaker question that's your go-to? That's not just like, what's your favorite food?
Ooh, yeah. So this one has to do with the zombie apocalypse. So you just look around. Yeah. You have to look around the class and you just say, hey, you get to pick one person in the group to take with you.
Okay.
On the zombie apocalypse. Who's it going to be? But you have to say why.
Okay. I love that. We're going to use it today.
We were doing this at the like New Trainer Summit years ago with it was like me, Tosh, who actually we need to get Tosh on the show.
Or somebody talking about it.
Yeah, and it was like Andrew Charlesworth and a bunch of, and like Nicole Carroll was there, and Tosh basically said he would kill Nicole because he would rather her die by his hand than by the zombies and stuff like that. It was so funny because she was so offended, and like it was incredible though. But Andrew Charlesworth also didn't choose Tosh, and I like immediately went to Tosh. I was like, I'm taking Tosh. Like Tosh is going with me on this one. Yeah. And Charlesworth was like, you know, I don't really know you. I don't know if you're good in pressure situations. And I was like, okay. I was like, hey man, use the Google machine, and you might find out some information. But anyway, I like the old zombie apocalypse. Like, who are you going to take with you and why?
Okay, that's a good one. We're going to use that one.
Cool. Hey, listen, thanks for your time. This was awesome. There's a ton of good stuff on here, and hope to work with you soon.
Yeah, you too.
All right.
Thank you.
Bye.
Improving your life or achieving your goals can sometimes feel like climbing a mountain. On the Tiny Leaps, Big Changes podcast, host Greg Clunas gives practical tips and advice to help you build momentum towards accomplishing the seemingly impossible. Each episode provides research-based strategies or firsthand experiences on topics like mental health, fitness, nutrition, finances, career, and relationships. You can listen to the Tiny Leaps Big Changes podcast on Spotify or wherever else you listen to your favorite podcast. Thanks for listening to Best Hour of Their Day. If you haven't heard about Anchor, it's the easiest way to make a podcast. Let me explain. First of all, it's free. How cool is that? There's a creation tool that allows you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer, so it becomes super simple. Some of these episodes with Fern or Todd or myself chatting with one another, we've done right within the app itself. Anchor will make it easy to distribute your podcast to all platforms, Spotify, Apple, and many more. And you can make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. It's everything you need to make an awesome podcast in one place. All you have to do is download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started today. Thanks again for listening to Best Hour of Their Day. We hope you enjoyed this episode. And if you did, one more time, please leave us a review on Apple Podcast and send us any feedback you have to @besthouroftheirday on Instagram and besthouroftheirday@gmail.com if you want to shoot us an email. We appreciate you. Thanks again. Have a great rest of your day.